Great. Thank you, Melissa. My name is Megan Bedell. I'm an acquisitions editor with Corwin's Equity and Professional Learning List. And I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, usually in New York, but I'm in beautiful sunny LA today. And it's my honor to be here with our author, Fenesha Hubbard. Fenesha has been leading K through 12 professional development for over 20 years. Her experience includes being a middle school math teacher, instructional coach, workshop facilitator, and a designer of professional development for NWEA and Chicago Public Schools. She's passionate about creating authentic learning experiences and helping others grow. Her work connects research-driven ideas with best teaching practices while keeping the learner at the center and humanity as the anchor. This focus is abundantly clear in Fenesha's new book, The Equity Expression, 6 Entry Points for Non-Negotiable Academic Success, published just last month in partnership with NWEA. So this is a webinar, but it's also kind of a launch party. We're so excited to have this book out into the world. Fenesha's career motto has always been supporting students by servicing teachers. And so in that spirit, Corwin is so thankful to have Fenesha with us for this next hour to support you and your students. I'm going to turn it over to Fenesha.
Thank you so much, Megan and Melissa. And hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to be here today. We are gathered to talk about one of the hottest topics in education right now, and that is equity. I don't know if you all knew it or not, but equity is the third most desired PD topic among educators. And that's because we want to learn about how to leverage equity for student success. And so we're here today to learn about the entry points for equity as a way to do just that. If you haven't already, I invite you to grab something for note-taking and get ready to engage with this session. I want us to start, though, with our current reality. The pandemic shifted the landscape of education, and it has clearly illuminated so many areas of inequities. And as a result, everybody's talking about equity. But there are some key pieces that are missing from the equity conversation. And one critical piece is the role of teachers in the equity equation. I believe that if you're not talking about how to foster the fullest ability of teachers, then you're not really talking about equity. Have I caught your attention yet? Have I piqued your interest? Let me know in the chat box. Are you an adult that cares about the success of our students? And I hope you are, because if that is the case, then this session today is for you. I am Fenesha Hubbard. I'm going to guide your learning experience as we focus on using the entry points for equity. And as Megan mentioned, today I am celebrating 21 years as an educator, and the majority of my experience has been in math and professional development, and most recently writing the guidebook on equity for you. But ironically, it took me nearly a quarter of a century before I identified and proclaimed that I was a math person. So I want to talk about that. And I'm going to ask you a question. Are you a math person? I want you to raise your hand or show a reaction in our chat box if you consider yourself a math person. Now, I'm certain that you can name at least 5 people who would proudly say, I'm not a math person. And I bring this up because there are non-math people who are supporting our students right now. And I want to say that again. There are self-proclaimed non-math people that are supporting our students on their learning journeys right now. And that's creating a different problem for us. It's creating a problem of unhealthy academic identities. And that is not okay. Because if we are all truly working to improve student performance, then academic success should be a non-negotiable goal for everyone. Non-negotiable goal for everyone, but it's not. And that's because a lot of us are content with not being math people. All right, I hope I got your attention now. This session is not about math, but I wanted to start with the topic of math because we all have a math experience, whether good or bad. And I want to tell you about mine. As a young student, I was consistently an average performer in math. I never felt understood by my teachers. I was repeatedly put in trouble for talking too much in class. And really what I was trying to do was help my teachers understand my way of thinking. I wanted to help them make the math make sense to me. I wasn't a good math student. I was not enthusiastic about learning math. I was full of untapped potential that my teachers didn't quite understand how to reach. And as educators, we have the responsibility to engage in forward thinking, forward focused equity conversations to make sure that all of our students have an opportunity to succeed and thrive in their schooling. If that resonates with you, I want you to put a reaction in the chat box. I see some clapping going on, and I'm going to repeat that for you. And I want you to notice the reactions in the room. As educators, we have the responsibility to engage in equity conversations that help us ensure that all of our students have an opportunity to succeed and thrive. That means that we have to constantly learn and grow and develop our academic identities. My math identity is anchored in my experience of not being a math person. And that indirectly told me that I was not a good or successful math student. But I was lucky because I became aware of my math identity early on. I was able to reflect on how it influenced my teaching. And that is the thing that helped me to be more effective in making the math meaningful and purposeful and engaging for students. Please get your materials ready for note taking, because I'm going to introduce a topic to you right now that might be fairly new to you. What we think about teaching and learning needs to be the foundation for our equity conversations. And this is what we call academic identities. And specifically, those are the dispositions and beliefs that make up our relationships with teaching, with learning, with educational topics and concepts and subjects. All of us, teachers, students, parents, we all have academic identities, whether we are aware of them or not. And they come from our experiences as learners. And that shapes our teaching practices and it influences our young people. And when you have unhealthy academic identities, it can manifest as disengaged students in class, behavioral problems. It can show up as a lack of effort, students who think that they can't succeed. It can also show up as a teacher's inability to move student scores. One of the greatest inequities that I experienced as a young girl was the type of teaching that supported this checklist mindset. It positioned math as facts and procedures to be memorized. And I often wonder, how would an equity lens among my teachers have shaped my experience differently? So rather than teaching one way of solving a problem, what would my learning experience have been like if my teachers encouraged me to find different solution methods? What type of student would I have been in math where there was curiosity and questioning being encouraged, where it was okay to get the wrong answer? It was expected to get the wrong answer, and it wasn't penalized, and that we celebrated all the different ways that we thought. Imagine how I would have thrived if I personally had unequivocal faith in my own intellectual capacity and capability. And I want you to imagine the possibilities if teachers, if all of us had the mindset that all of our students are capable of success. Understanding our academic identities and how it impacts teaching and learning is the first way that we start to address equity. And before we jump into the entry points, I always want to help you unpack your academic identity, because that's going to reveal some of the factors that contribute to what you choose to teach, how you choose to teach it, what you believe about the students that you teach. And so we're going to do a short activity. I want you to pick 2 questions from this slide, and then I'm going to give us all about 60 seconds of thought time to respond silently. All right, everyone in the room, what I want you to do now, identify your 2 questions. I'm going to set my timer, and then we'll come on back in 60 seconds. I'll see you then. Please respond to your 2 questions. Let's take about 15 more seconds. I invite you, if you feel comfortable, to put your response in the chat box, but it's not required because this is a very personal topic and there might be some things that you still need to grapple with or sit with and make sense of. But I do want you to be aware of how it felt for you to answer those questions and notice your responses. Think about how your responses might have an influence on how you teach today. And if you're not a teacher, maybe it has an impact on your relationships with our young people, with our students. The questions that I have on the screen here about your academic identity are the questions that we need to ask ourselves as we begin our equity work. And they do require some deep reflection. And that's because attending to the work of equity means that you are being deliberate in raising your awareness about yourself and about others. You're exploring your beliefs, you're examining your actions, you are strengthening your academic identity. Now, I want you to think about our students. How might they begin to answer these same questions? And what is your role in ensuring that our students have positive experiences and that they can go on to develop their healthy academic identities? I want to do a quick check-in. I just want to see how this concept of academic identities resonates with you. So I want you to rate your understanding. You're going to be either I've got it or I need it. So I got it means that you understand what I'm talking about. It's making sense to you. And after this webinar, you can go and explain it to somebody else. Need it means it's kind of new to you, but you're open and receptive to learning more. Don't put in the chat box yet. I want us to do what's called a waterfall chat. That means everyone's going to type their responses, but we don't press enter until I count to 3. So when it comes to academic identities, do you got it or do you need it? Please go ahead and type your response in the chat box. Wait till I count to 3. Wait till I count to 3. Wait till I count to 3. All right, so you've got it typed in. And on the count of 3, everyone's going to press enter. 1, 2, 3. Ooh, they're coming in. I can do a quick glance of all of the responses, but I'm going to ask somebody in the room. Go ahead and maybe do a quick scan more thoroughly and give us a ballpark estimate as to what percentage of us feel like we got it, what percentage need it, and just share that in the chat box after everybody has put in their responses. And thank you in advance for whoever volunteers to do that. All right, let's keep this topic going. And I want us to look at the data because the data don't lie. Let's let the data explain why this topic is important. Before the pandemic, the typical instructional levels in a 5th grade classroom could span more than 7 grades. So what does that mean? That means you have a group of young people where maybe 30% are ready for a concept at grade level and 10% might have a level of readiness far above grade level. How many of you all have seen a classroom where the students' levels of readiness span about 6 grade levels? And I know from my educators in the room, you're probably thinking, of course I have. This is not uncommon. And this is why it's essential that we as educators understand the standards and how the standards progress and how topics progress and concepts progress across grade levels. But now I want us to look at our current reality, the current reality. This data that you see on the screen was based on a study conducted by NWA researchers. And the findings show that the achievement gains last year lagged pre-pandemic trends. So right now, the average student is going to require 4.1 months of additional schooling to catch up to pre-COVID levels in reading and 4.5 months in math. That means we have very important work ahead of us. We need to help our students be able and prepared to access grade level content regardless of their level of readiness. I want you to show your reaction to this data using one of our reaction features in the virtual space. And please trust and know that it is evident that we have a great need right now for a very sustained and collective effort to help our students with unfinished learning. That means that we have work to do on ourselves. Research definitely shows that there's correlations between student achievement and teacher effectiveness. And the two things that we have not addressed enough in professional development are teacher efficacy and pedagogical content knowledge. Meaning, how can we expect to achieve equity in education if we don't truly invest in our teachers' ability to teach effectively? So we have to increase the level of confidence that teachers have in their ability to guide students towards success. We have to strengthen our beliefs that all students are capable of academic success. And these are the major components to making equity actionable in teaching and learning. So let's get to it. 3 questions that I want us to consider at this point. 1, do we have a shared understanding of what equity is and what it does? Number 2, are we aware of the types of inequities that exist for our students? And number 3, how are we working to achieve equity for our students? I'll tell you what equity is and what it does. Equity is the fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for students and educators that facilitate their individual success and belonging. Equity identifies and eliminates the barriers to access and opportunities that put others at a disadvantage. I want you to think about how my definition of equity squares with yours. Because if we're going to work toward a thing, in this case, equity, and if we're going to make progress toward that thing, then we need to agree on what that thing is and how we define it. Here are some of the things that educators are saying about equity. And the good news is that we value equity. We understand that it is an essential part to our district and our school missions. We are clear on what it means for young people when we enact equity. And there's agreement that providing all students with access to the instruction, the tools, the resources that they need to grow and succeed is the key to putting equity in action. But the other things that we need to do are acknowledge and support that our students have a lot of different needs. We need to do a better job of making the content come alive for our students. We need to help them see themselves in the content. And our students are telling us that in so many ways. So collectively, educators, we understand the need and the want to help our students succeed. So let's look at how we put that into action. Equity is such a big topic, and I know sometimes it can feel overwhelming. It can be challenging to try to address all the facets of equity. And although we might all share the same intention of partnering to help all students learn, we have different lenses and different perspectives and different contexts through which we view situations. So to meet this challenge, we use the entry points for equity. And that's because opportunities for equitable teaching and learning are everywhere. And when we use entry points, it helps us highlight where those opportunities are, and it provides starting points where those opportunities don't exist. So the 6 entry points that I've identified: mindsets, relationships, products, spaces, processes, and systems. We're going to examine a few of the entry points now. Please continue with your note taking. And the first one we're going to start with is mindsets. Mindsets. This is what focuses on our mental attitudes. It's how we think about teaching and learning, what we believe about teaching and learning. And it's at this entry point that we explore how mindsets impact our academic identities. And the reason I make a connection between mindsets and a person's academic identity is because the decisions and the actions that show up in our classrooms are a result of our beliefs. And this directly relates to equity because all the decisions that we make impact our students' experiences in the classrooms. I truly, truly believe that decisions that are rooted in right thinking will lead to right action. And as I said earlier, if you understand your own beliefs about teaching, you are more equipped to operationalize equity. And cultivating this healthy academic identity and mindset is an ongoing process. And that's because if you reach the point where you feel that you can't grow any further, then you have literally restricted the intellectual spaces to which your students can go. I want to show you an example of an inequitable mindset. I don't think the boys will score as well on the upcoming reading tests because the girls in my class are much better at reading diligently during class time. Sounds simple. Sounds like something we might say. But I want you to notice the mindset shift in the equitable response. All students can succeed, and all students can succeed and have a level of success on this upcoming test. So let's talk about what we can do to encourage everybody in the class to work their hardest. I start with the mindset as the first entry point because it's intended to be the foundation for all our other entry points. And that's because, like it or not, our mindsets have biases. And equity begins with how our mind is set, literally. This example shows why it's important to separate our predictions about how students will perform from the assumptions that we have about their ability. And so when we start to check ourselves, when our mind starts to lean heavily on stereotypes, and when we explore what's not being said about what we think about our students, that's what helps us to put equity in action. Let's take a look at the next one, relationships. Relationships. The entry point of relationships is where we dive into the importance of understanding how to build and maintain psychologically safe connections with other educators and ourselves. And that's because relationships that serve as mirrors and that are able to reflect back to us the actions and the behaviors and the choices that we make in the classroom, we can leverage those relationships to challenge ourselves to be more conscious and more self-aware of the impact that we have on students. One of my favorite late great actors, Michael K. Williams, he once said, "I've got to do the personal work so I can do the professional work, which is where I get the platform to do the real work." And with this entry point, I introduce you to 3 steps for doing just that. So step number 1, you need to select a specific type of trusted peer partners. And in my book, I guide you through identifying what those 2 types are and how to select them. You don't want to just random relationships are great, but when we're more strategic and intentional about those relationships, it helps us to enact equity better, more effectively. Step number 2, we want to reimagine professional development as a continuing educator. How does that show up in our day-to-day? Not just in a workshop, not just at a conference, but how does it show up in our day-to-day? And number 3, we want to develop a greater self-awareness around how we view equity. I think we can all agree that the pandemic completely changed how we connect with one another. And for that reason, it's critical that we're more intentional about how we build and foster relationships. I want us to look at one more entry point, and that is products. Products are a hot topic in education right now, and the landscape of what we use to teach our students is rapidly changing. But throughout the changes, one thing that remains true is that if we truly believe in an equitable education for our students, then we need to ensure our students have access to high quality content. I want us to do another short exercise. I want you to think about at least 10 products that you use with students right now. Products are things such as textbooks, manipulative tools, novels, software programs, even the electronic devices that you might use, things that enhance your teaching and learning. So off the top of your head, I want you to list about 10 products that you use with students, and I'll pause for about 10 seconds. I do invite you to put some of those responses in the chat box, because if we have non-educators in the room, it might help them to better understand what we're talking about when we say products. I want you to take a list at what you came up with. And some things that you want to think about when it comes to products is, what kind of information does this product give me about my students? And what does this product reveal to me about how my students learn? Do the products give my students an opportunity to actually learn content? And does it help them learn about how they learn? How do my students demonstrate what they know by using this product? One of the exercises that we do with this entry point is to assess the purpose and the intent of our products. And that's very important, because if you use products and you're not clear on your purpose and intent, it can leave you data rich and information poor. So we want to go in with purpose and intent. And then what we do is determine how well do our products align with our goals for teaching and learning. Once we're clear on that alignment, then we identify where we are on this continuum of product selection and product use in our environment. So in the book, I guide you and your team through thinking about why are we using these products? How does it align to our goals? And if we look at the continuum of how we're using products effectively in our school, in our district, where are we and how can we grow? We need to make sure that our products are meaningful to students, that they're relevant, that they are intellectually appropriate and intellectually challenging. The next entry point that I want to introduce you all to today is spaces. And the entry point of spaces is all about creating a well-designed classroom, whether it's in person, whether it's virtual. Creating a well-designed classroom is an absolute gift to your learners because it lets them know that you care, because you've honored their learning needs. You took the time to set the stage and the tone for learning. Let's turn it back on you for a second. I want you to think about the last workspace you were in before this webinar. Think about what it looked like, what it sounded like, what it felt like, even what it smelled like. And what did you instinctively want to do in that space? The entry point of spaces helps us to open up a dialogue about how to change the makeup of our learning environments so that we can foster and protect the intellectually safe spaces for our students to really thrive. We want their curiosity to thrive. And the purpose of your classroom is to serve as a gathering space for teaching and learning. And again, that's reflected in your own beliefs about how teaching and learning should occur. So essentially, the design of your space should align with your intention for learning. So, for example, if your intention is for students to learn from and with one another, then the spaces should allow for student-to-student discourse and the sharing of student work. But if we're all sitting in straight rows, sometimes that might make student-to-student discourse a little more challenging. If your intention is for your students to be positioned as scientists, then your space should have accessible manipulative tools. And conversely, I want you to think about what message is being conveyed to students when all the manipulative tools are locked away in a closet and we have to ask permission to use them. We have the power to create the spaces that stimulate our students' desires to learn. I want us to look at an example of the entry point of spaces. And in this example, there are students in the school who can see their names along with their test scores posted on the wall, visibly for everybody. And at this school or in the school environment, the teachers believe that this is going to encourage our students to work harder. That's a different type of motivation. And a more equitable approach is, let's not identify the individual students. Let's think about how we can share our student data in a way that still encourages our students to work towards success. I want you to think about, when we have inequitable spaces, how that impacts the social, emotional, and the cognitive development of our students. The makeup and the design of our spaces and that we learn in has a direct effect on us, whether we're aware of it or not. There are two more entry points that I invite you to get into later with me when we engage after this webinar, and I'll tell you about that just a little bit more later. But what I want you to do now is to think about one entry point, maybe one that resonates with you, one that stands out to you, and just take about 30 seconds to identify an inequity with that entry point and start to consider how that situation could be made more equitable. I'm going to set my timer for 30 seconds so I can silence my voice and you can make the voice in your mind a little bit louder. See if you can think of an inequity for one entry point. Were you able to identify an inequity related to an entry point? I do want to know, so please show a reaction or put a comment in the chat box. If you're comfortable sharing the actual inequity, please put that as well. Sometimes it helps us to learn about what inequities are when we hear how other people identify with those inequities. So what's the next step? I want someone from you or your team to reach out to me so that we can devise a plan of action. And that can be either through hosting a workshop, conducting a book study, engaging in a coaching session, facilitating dialogue during grade level team meetings. The most important thing is that we talk about it. The entry points are what help us to elevate our current practices by strategically and purposefully talking about equity and making it a priority in our work. I love this quote by Geneva Gay. I'm going to read it twice because this is the key that I want you all to walk away with in addition to the entry points. Geneva Gay, she's an equity empowered educator, she's a scholar, an academic, and she says that culturally responsive teachers have unequivocal faith in the human dignity and intellectual capabilities of their students. Academic success is a non-negotiable goal for everyone and the responsibility of all participants in the teaching, learning process. I'm going to reread that quote because we are all on mute and hopefully you are in an environment where you can speak out loud. What I want you to do is read this quote with me. Culturally responsive teachers have unequivocal faith in the human dignity and intellectual capabilities of their students. Academic success is a non-negotiable goal for everyone and the responsibility of all participants in the teaching learning process. Our students really do deserve the best of us. And our call to action as educators is to start to cultivate a practice of better understanding ourselves, better understanding each other, questioning our biases, holding ourselves accountable, holding each other accountable. And I want you all to remember that if you reach the point where you feel like you can't grow any further as an educator, as an adult that supports our young people, if you cannot grow any further, then you are literally restricting the intellectual spaces to which you and your students can go. And wherever you enter the equity conversation is fine, just as long as you enter with an openness to learn and a willingness to grow and change. I need to know who is with me on this equity journey. If you are an equity empowered educator and you are on fire, I want you to find that heart in the reaction box. I see some hearts coming through. Let's flood the room with hearts. And maybe you're not quite there yet. And if you're not quite there yet, that's okay. Say it. Be honest. That's the key to moving forward. Honesty, authenticity. Thank you all for showing the love in the room. Educators, I want you to join us in creating space for equity conversations that will empower all of us. And one way to do that is through our workshop series that accompanies the book. And through these 6 workshops, what you'll do is engage in a way that puts equity in the context of professional development that is meaningful, that's valuable, that is well worth your time, that is relevant, that aligns to your school improvement plans and goals. The exercises and the activities that are embedded in the book, as well as the workshops, are going to help you examine all the messy stuff that comes up when we engage in equity work. And it's going to guide you through ideating possibilities for growth and change. Through these workshops and through the book, you are going to work with your team to co-create solutions that will lead to improved student outcomes, because that is the goal for everyone. I'm really glad that you all took the time to engage with me and with others today, and it looks like there's a lot of dialogue in the chat box. I look forward to going back and reading all of the comments, and I do want to share my my information with you because I asked you to reach out to me. And once I read these comments, I might reach out to you. You can go ahead and find me on LinkedIn. Please join the conversation there. I am also in the cyberspace formerly known as Twitter. And if you click on the link that is located at the bottom of the screen, it will direct you to all of my other virtual spaces. Educators, community members, everyone who loves students, I'm really glad that you took time to be here today. I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa.
And Fenesha, if you wouldn't mind taking down your slides, just so we can all get a better view of you. And we'll start off with a question. This one is what's I think is top of mind for a lot of educators right now. So what advice do you have for educators who are struggling with how to talk about equity in their classrooms, given the current political climate?
Yeah, that is the question. That is the question that's on a lot of people's minds. It's a very valid question. It's a very important question. And I do want to recognize the fact that a lot of educators are in schools and districts and situations right now where the environment might be hostile. It might not be the most enjoyable environment to show up in every day. It might be hard to hold on to your joy for teaching and learning because of the political climate. But nonetheless, the most important thing is that we keep our focus on our students. I think if we keep the focus on our students, we're better positioned to do the real work of equity. Equity is a very personal topic, and the instructional moves, the things that we do in the classroom, whether they're equitable or inequitable, they all have an impact on our students. There's a saying that I love from, I think it was in the 60s, where it said, the personal is political. And in the case of using the 6 entry points, it is very personal. But it's not about the politicization of equity. The 6 entry points is personal, but it's not about politicizing equity. It's about the deep inner work that we need to do so that we can have the conversations around equity. And a lot of those conversations are uncomfortable. They will make us uncomfortable, but we need to have them. And so if you do the inner work first, you're better equipped to then connect with other colleagues in a non-judgmental way. One thing that I'll never forget, we conducted an equity research study at NWEA. And so we talked to educators from all over the country, at different levels in education, from superintendents to classroom teachers. And there was a principal, and she said, this is what we need to do. We need to have an educator boot camp so that teachers can examine their views and their practices and how that plays out in the classroom. And that's exactly what we're doing with the entry points for equity. It is our own personal boot camp. It's given us the permission to commit to having the tough conversations about equity. And as educators, we have to do the inner work. And the 6 entry points allows us to do that in a very safe way. Yeah, thanks for that. That was a good question.
Thank you for that response. I am looking in the chat to see if other people have questions. There's a lot of enthusiasm, and I am seeing some requests for part 2, 3, and 4 of this webinar. So
okay.
There's that. Does anybody have any, beyond just wanting more of Fenesha's work, any other questions to ask her today?
It sounds like I now have homework, right?
Yes, so they're giving you homework.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I'm curious to know, as we're waiting on questions, educators, if you had to rate yourself on where you are on your equity journey, maybe you're a beginner, maybe you are a novice expert. Where are you in your journey? Because it's up to us to help each other along the way in that journey. So being aware of where you are. When you get the book, I want you to also do some of the exercise in the first couple of chapters that'll really help you get clear on where you are, and then reach out to me and let me know. It's important that you and your team are all able to identify what is my readiness to engage in equity conversations. And then from that, you decide which entry points we want to focus on, right? So maybe we're all ready to start with entry point and systems because that is a driving need for us. Melissa, how are we doing with questions?
We've got another one. I love that idea of the entry points, giving everybody a way into this work that really resonates with them. So thank you for emphasizing that. We've got a question from Sarah Leckel. How do you balance grade level with support so that the supports do not actually prevent or hinder student growth?
Oh, Sarah, that's the question. Thank you, Sarah. That's the question from educators since time immemorial. We have to start to agree, like, what is the goal? What is the minimum that we want our students to be at? We also want to look at the difference between scaffolding and differentiating. I know that there's a lot of confusion sometimes in education about, well, what does that look like? How do I actually differentiate? How do I actually scaffold when I have instructional levels that vary 6 grades in my classroom? What does that look like for me? So I think the most important thing we need to do is make sure that as teachers, we are very well versed in the standards, not just at your grade level, but you need to have a vertical understanding of the standards. And within those standards, you need to understand the progression of concepts and topics so that you're more equipped. Sarah, underlying that question might be the fact that I don't have enough time to do that, or I have too many other things to address in the classroom. And so if that is the case, that's where we want to work together, like with your grade level team or within your support system in the school to come up with a plan that works for you. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is address unfinished learning and make sure our students have access to grade level content. Sarah, let me know if that answered your question. Melissa, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you. So we've got a couple more coming in. Well, so we have one comment about Amber shares that she thinks her readiness as a teacher in terms of equity is advanced, but her readiness as a leader and a coach is emerging. And I bring that up because then we have a question from Stephanie saying, how do you help shift people's mindsets if they don't realize their mindsets are fixed? And I think that relates to this idea of becoming more advanced as a leader in an equity space to help bring other people along.
Yeah, that's a great question. And Sarah, thank you for affirming that I answered your question. The most important thing is that we don't go in trying to change people, because the minute you try to change someone's way of thinking or their actions or the behaviors, you are creating a barrier between you and that person. There are situations where your administration needs to step in. If our students are being harmed, if their academic identities are being drastically threatened, we have to step in, and that requires change, right? So that might be a change in some other things, hiring, staffing. But when it comes to a teacher's belief, let's say, for example, I have a teacher who is afraid of teaching the Pythagorean theorem because they don't quite understand it themselves. And this is a real thing. I have seen it. In that case, then collectively we need to work with that teacher to understand why is there a barrier there? Why aren't they ready? And then how can I help them move forward with their learning? Let me know if that makes sense to you. And I think who asked that question? Please affirm in the chat box if that makes sense to you.
That was from Stephanie. We have another question from Barbara. How do you introduce equity to the staff? And it sounds like Barbara's not an administrator, but she's certified in a small charter school. So if you're in a smaller learning environment, how do you introduce this concept?
That's a great question, Barbara. I definitely recommend starting with academic identities because it's something that we can all relate to. You always start where people are. And where are we? We are all learners in some capacity, and we've all been learners. So, and from my experience working with educators around the country, starting with academic identities is a very easy way to ease into the entry points for equity because, one, you're affirming who that person is. You're looking at your staff, you're looking at your team, and you're saying, I see you. I see what you've been through, and I see where your students are. Now let's find the connection between all of those.
That is a great response. And Stephanie says you did answer her question. I think I have not seen any new ones come in, so we may, oh, wait. Oh, that's a thank you. If you end up coming away from today's event with any other questions, Fenesha shared her contact information. You're always welcome to email info@corwin.com, and that account is monitored, and we will find the right person to answer your question if you have something that comes up after a webinar. So I think we are ready to wrap up, but thank you so much, Fenesha Hubbard, and thank you to everybody who joined us today.
Thank you, educators. Go out and be great. I'll see you next time.